Necromancy is a dangerous and loathsome dark art. It is the vile practice of forcing spirits into servitude, creating monsters from flesh and bone, or extending one's own life through blood sacrifice. Yet in 5th edition, necromancy can feel rather mundane. When a holy chapel is willing to resurrect anyone for the right donation, or an adventurer is casually raising every other corpse they kill, necromancy loses its dark shroud. If you want death magic to instead feel dangerous and forbidden in your dark fantasy campaign, then this video is for you. My name is Ben Byrne, and this is the arcane art of necromancy. Necromancy has a reputation as a vile and dangerous practice. Much of fantasy literature represents it as evil almost by default. Yet, as many folks pointed out in the comments of our blood-soaked sangromancy video, many necromancy spells are used to heal, protect, and revive as much as they are used to harm creatures. There's certainly a lively and very technical debate that could be had as to the moral implications of practicing necromancy. Is it inherently evil to create evil-aligned creatures in 5e? Or is it more ethical to use a workforce of meat and bone puppets rather than exploiting a living population? Necromancy is irrevocably thematically tied to death. Death is a frightening concept, and we naturally are appalled by the imagery of death, such as bones, blood, and rotting cadavers. The symbols of death, such as tombstones, black-feathered ravens, and human skulls, are used to symbolize danger and evil. And we're not only afraid of our own death, but that of our loved ones as well. We are afraid of losing them, and afraid of the grief that comes after death has passed. Therefore, a school of magic that focuses on death is going to just naturally seem sinister. Yet necromancy is also associated with corruption. As frightful as death is, it's a natural part of the cycle of life, and perhaps a natural part of the god's design in your campaign world. Necromancy corrupts that cycle, spitting in the face of the gods, because only the gods are naturally capable of creating life. Necromancy also corrupts ideals and intentions. The very intent to extend one's own life, or even that of others, is rooted in ambition and egotism. A necromancer decides that accomplishing their goals is far more important than the nature of the world in which they live, or the lives or souls of anybody else around them. This theme of corruption also links with the theme of decay. The image of decaying flesh and bone is conjured by the very word necromancy. Yet the rotting visage of a necromancer or their minions is also a visual cue to their wickedness and corrupted spirit, featuring necromancy cloaked in these themes of death, fear, grief, ambition, corruption, and decay is perfect for conjuring a dark fantasy atmosphere for your campaign. Necromancy empowers a spellcaster to manipulate all aspects of death, including the corporeal body and incorporeal spirit. Why wouldn't a king or a noble or anybody who could afford it pay fortunes for the power of resurrection? Bringing back a great hero from the cusp of death is surely an act of good if they can go on to do further good. Why should the characters of your campaign world fear necromancy at all? In the real world, we have no definitive way of knowing what happens to the human soul after it dies. This should be true in your campaign world as well, because as we touched on in this video devoted to deities and religion in dark fantasy, evidence of the gods or an afterlife should be vague and based on faith. Death is a terrifying unknown, and if nobody is certain what happens after death, the practice of necromancy becomes that much more mysterious and frightening. Think about what might actually happen to the bodies and souls of those who are being manipulated with the magic of necromancy. Is a zombie merely a flesh puppet in your campaign? Is the unliving soul of a person trapped inside their own husk, giving the corpse the semblance of life, yet they are unable to speak or scream? While being resurrected may seem appealing, perhaps your soul is being plucked from a paradise and forced back into the mortal realm to toil and suffer. Does the act of being resurrected taint a person's soul in the eyes of the gods, damning them forever to never be accepted back into the heavens? Maybe being revived or spiritually summoned damages the soul in some way, inflicting trauma or torment upon the undead individual. Is it painful to be forced to speak from the grave, reliving your final moments while being plied with questions? Imagine being a shackled spirit, forced to do the bidding of another, so that not even in death are you able to rest. All of these ideas about how necromancy actually works could be literally true in your fantasy world, or they could just be superstitions held by the uneducated. But think about how these ideas would affect the attitudes that the characters in your world have to necromancy. Of course, it is one thing to insist that necromancy is a dangerous and evil practice, yet it can still be easy for the players to be flippant about casting necromancy spells if it doesn't feel dangerous. Inflict Wounds, Ray of Sickness, and Ray of Enfeeblement are common low-level necromantic spells that target an enemy creature to inflict injury or decay. I usually describe Inflict Wounds as spontaneous lacerations unsealing themselves across the victim's body, with blood gushing from the wounds. Ray of Sickness may cause the surface veins of the victim to turn black and spread out across their body as a nauseating pain grips them. A creature afflicted with blindness, deafness may have their eyes filled with veins or pus, or turned yellow as the world around them grows dark. This isn't merely being scorched with fire or targeted by magical daggers. Necromancy aims to untether the soul from the body, particularly through spells like Toll the Dead or Finger of Death, where creatures just drop dead where they are. Therefore, the effects of these spells should appear horrific and spooky. The presence of a necromancer on the battlefield should incite an existential dread in its victims in a way that Flame and Steel simply can't. If you burn to death, your soul will still go to the heavens, but if you are resurrected by a necromancer, what happens to you then? Vampiric Touch drains the life from another creature to sustain your own. It plays into that theme of selfish ambition that we talked about. Are you drawing the blood out of the victim through your fingertips, or are they rotting away in your grasp while you become rejuvenated? For necromantic spells to function, inherently someone else must suffer, even if that isn't necessarily the end goal of the spell. Spirit Shroud and Summon Undead are both from Tasha's Cauldron, and neither of them ask for any sort of mechanical sacrifice on the battlefield. But who's to say that the conjured undead spirits are acting in service to the necromancer willingly? Does the Spirit Shroud ghoulishly shriek as the angry souls are ripped from whatever afterlife that they had found comfort in and set loose upon the necromancer's enemies? Does a ghoulish servant gaze at the necromancer with hideous contempt, furious at being conjured, yet performs the bidding like a creature shackled and pulled by spectral chains? Even Speak with Dead can be described horrifically. The victim could writhe as if experiencing the pain of their final moments whilst answering questions in rasping, choking gasps. Maybe there is a light amount of homebrew happening here, because if you read the rules for Speak with Dead, it does specify that the creature's soul doesn't return to their corpse, it's only their animating spirit. But honestly, I find that to be a bit of a cop-out. Perhaps the animating spirit is a fragment of the creature's soul, disturbing their rest nonetheless. You and your group can always change the subtleties of how a spell functions to work within the atmosphere of your campaign world. let's be honest. How do these darker ideas and themes concerning necromancy hold up in a world where divine magic exists? Well, you can do this in two ways. Firstly, by making divine casters exceedingly rare within the world where your game takes place. And secondly, by delineating a difference between divine necromancy and arcane necromancy. You should establish among your group during your session 0 that clerics and paladins, in the D&D sense of the words, will be treated as literal prophets of their deities, rather than just another cleric or paladin in service to their god. Clerics capable of divine healing don't exist at every temple. The party may be able to get healed or healing supplies from a church or maybe even a medieval physician, but actual death is more or less permanent. You can't make a donation at the church and expect resurrection. It simply doesn't exist, and priests might even be horrified by the sacrilegious notion of being returned from death. And in terms of miraculous healing, if the cleric or paladin in the party demonstrate their ability to heal miraculously, the NPCs of your world will probably consider it, well, a miracle. The cleric or paladin's unique holiness is likely why they are one of the main characters of your campaign world. Divine magic is only possible by the will and power of the gods, and so divine necromancy is closer to miracle work than the arcane manipulation of reality. There are many real-world religious and mythological stories as well about resurrection by divine power. When a resurrection spell is cast by a party member, it should have the same amount of narrative importance and gravity. It should be more the will of the gods as much as the will of the cleric. The one exception to all of that for me is Revivify, which I tend to treat more as a resuscitation than resurrection. A character may have been legally dead for 27 seconds, but they aren't yet brain dead, or in a more fantasy sense, their soul has not yet departed their mortal body in the 60 seconds that you have to cast Revivify. I hope you found these tips and ideas useful for your game. If so, we'd really appreciate if you like this video or join our Dark Fantasy campaign by subscribing to the channel. This video also links perfectly with our one on featuring lichers as a formidable threat to your party, or this one about why you should stop featuring undead in your game to make them as frightening and formidable as possible.